What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and this is where we're going to be talking about building creative muscles today. And I got a long time kind of friend here on the internet, somebody who I've seen around. He's seen me around. We've been in the same circles for a long time. I don't know how we both have YouTube channels and have never been on each other's channel. But it's happened. It's awkward. It's weird. It's happened, but we're here now, and we're making it happen. So here is Mr. Jeremy. You say what? Burleigh. Burleigh. Okay.
Yes.
Jeremy Burleigh. And Jeremy, where can people find you, and tell people a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Well, my website is jerimi.net, and it's spelled Gerimi. So unique spelling, makes it easy to Google, easy to misspell also. So, but I am a comic book artist, writer, self-publisher, a YouTuber. I share my artwork online, and I share my creative process. Most of what I have on my website is basically my store, but on the side of it has links to all my social media, my Instagram, Twitter, the YouTube channel. But most of what I'm sharing online is like a constant work in progress. I try to let people into what my daily creative life is. Whatever's on my drawing board, whatever's on my iPad, whatever I'm working on and making, to some degree, I feel like I should definitely be having more finished pieces on there. But as you well know, the process of making comics takes quite a long time to have a finished issue up to share that. But I definitely share everything that I'm doing and making as I go.
Awesome. Yeah, and I've totally enjoyed watching your progress throughout the years, and I've always seen your videos and been like, I gotta get his comic because it sounds really cool. Like, I'm a fan of kind of a casual fan of the show Supernatural, and to me, I feel like there's definitely a lot of similar themes in what you're doing to that. Especially when they get into the angels and demons type stuff. Tell everybody a little bit about the book that you're working on.
Okay. Yeah. So my current series is Morning Star. It's an 8-issue series, and it tells Lucifer's fall from heaven, but it's told as a Western. So the idea is at the dawn of creation, the universe is this raw, untamed frontier. It's a Wild West. There's 7 archangels that are like the Magnificent Seven, and Lucifer starts off as their leader. He's actually the marshal of heaven, because he wasn't created to be evil. He was supposed to be the brightest of all the angels. He's supposed to be perfect. So what went wrong? That's the story that I'm telling. Like, we all know how he ends up. I'm showing how he got there. It's basically Paradise Lost meets Unforgiven.
Awesome. I love that. And it definitely sounds interesting. I'm glad that I finally have had some extra money where I was able to purchase some. So I'm waiting anxiously for it to come in the mail. So that'll be really cool. And I also like the fact that you have, because this is one thing that as I've watched your videos, I've come to realize a pretty cool marketing kind of, I guess, marketing technique, but just a cool thing that you do with your comic, which is you put out a different, like a rough, I think, what is it, like a penciled version or something?
Yeah, it's a rough.
Before the actual issue comes out.
Yeah. I started originally calling it the rough cut, and eventually I just changed it to sketchbook, because when you're at a convention, I don't necessarily have to explain to someone what a rough cut is. If people just see an ash can sized, book, they're like, it's a sketchbook. They're like, I like this art, I'll pick it up. Then they open it and they find they're getting a whole story inside, and that's a pleasant surprise, as opposed to me having to walk them through what exactly it is. But that whole approach, I'm glad you dig it. And by the way, I appreciate you ordering the books. I got them out in the mail on Monday, and they're shipping media mail, so it's going to take a little while. But I appreciate that, so I want to thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the way that the rough cut came about, or the sketchbooks, what the part of that is, my process in making comics is that I draw my thumbnails. Then what I do is I create a template in Illustrator with all of the panels, and I letter that template before I do detailed layouts. Like my instead of doing finished pencils, I basically do what I consider layouts because my style is somewhat loose and it doesn't make sense for me to pencil tightly. So I do these lettered layouts so I can see how the text flows, and then when I go in and I adapt my thumbnails and tighten them up, it can make sure I can make sure I don't make those mistakes like putting a character who is speaking first on the right side of the panel instead of the left side of the panel.
Wow.
I can work all those things. Exactly. I mean, even someone I've been doing this for over a decade now, and I still have situations where my writing and my thumbnails don't line up. But the beauty of the fact that I am both lettering it and drawing it is that I can kind of decide, does this composition mean more to me than the way I have the dialogue laid out? And I can choose to rewrite it on the fly, or I can look at it and just say, nope, this is the order. You know, having those letters first allows me to catch those mistakes early and just say, nope, I need to flop it. I need to work out the composition and how those panels going to flow if I'm putting the characters in this different order. But because of that, and the time that it takes to produce an issue, I mean, it can take me, 6 months, sometimes 8 months to get an issue out because I'm, working around my day job. I figured once I have my my lettered template, the book's lettered, and I've got my rough pencils in there, I can basically just print that out as a sketchbook so someone can read the entire comic. They can get the whole story in there, but they get it over my rough layout. So it's a sketchbook, but it also is the full story that will be in the issue. And it's both cool for people that don't necessarily even collect or read series, but they just like getting ash cans and sketchbooks from artists they like at conventions. It also allows me to, in a way, kind of double my output because whereas, let's say it's going to take me 6 months to finish an issue, I can have something 3 months earlier for people who have already bought my books. Because I think that's the toughest thing for us as creators that are indie creators. The toughest thing is keeping our work in front of people that have already supported us. I don't want to let people that have bought the first issue or the second issue down. I don't want to have to make them wait months and months and years to read the whole story. So every time I can give them another chunk of the story, I've had people come to conventions and say, you know what, this looks awesome. I'm going to wait for the finished issue. I have no qualms with that. But if there's somebody who's really eager to get it, or they just want to jump on board, or they do like sketchbooks, it's there so people can read the story sooner.
Yeah, that's awesome. So have you found that as you've gotten to more and more issues, there's been a bigger following and people keep coming back and stuff like that?
I do. That's definitely true. And I saw a huge bump when I finished the first trade. And there's something about the whole series is 8 issues long, and I have 7 issues completed, and I'm working on the 8th and final issue now. But just the fact that people do like being able to come up, and if the concept is interesting, pick up a single issue, and then if they like it, they may come back and say, all right, let me get 2 or 3 or 4. But anytime you can give somebody a large, satisfying chunk of a book, a chunk of a story, that always seems to catch people earlier. I mean, it seems to catch them sooner. They're more willing to jump on and say, all right, I'm getting a nice, satisfying chunk. And the size I publish at it's like a large digest size. So it's kind of the size of like the Sin City reprints that are smaller than full comic book size. Mm-hmm. But they're not tiny, but it has that feeling of like a paperback book, just a paperback novel, trade paper, not a comic trade paperback, but a literary paperback. And I feel like because I'm not doing superhero work, even though I love superheroes, it's something that the format appeals to people who are reading things other than superheroes. Some people may see it or see my banner and like, oh, it's a supernatural Western, I'll check that out. Or they just look at the book and the sides and like, oh, it's a book that's got like a person of color on the cover. Let me check this out. It's like it's got that feeling of Western. It's got that feeling of fantasy. It's got definitely horror elements in it because there's a lot of fighting demons in this story. One could say that I was a little bit too. It touches a lot of different genres, But I like to think that instead what I did was I made an interesting mashup as opposed to it being scattered. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome. Like, I love the idea of mashing up genres, anyways. I mean, even, you talk about this is like a supernatural Western. The Glyph comic that I'm working on, I actually think of that as like almost a sci-fi Western. So it's like, I love the idea of mashing up genres. One thing I think that's interesting too is, so you're working on the last issue, and you have you, you're gonna probably. I'm assuming you're gonna publish that as a single issue, like you have before, and then you're probably going. Are you going to publish another trade, or are you going to publish a whole graphic novel? And isn't that a little like I've wondered this myself when I'm ready to do this because I do want to do single issues. Isn't it kind of weird to like try to market a single issue and then do you immediately do like a graphic novel or how does that work in the way have it planned out?
well, I will tell you that my personal taste, I believe that people should read comics in whatever format they want: print, digital, trade, single issues. I say make it available in all of those formats and then just let the consumer decide. I stopped reprinting the original first 4 issues once I had the collected trade of that. And I'm going to stop printing the issues 5 through 8 once I have the collected edition of that. But there's 2 things. The first answer is that the only reason why I'm really doing single issues is, again, the time that it takes me to finish a book. Because my first graphic novel that I produced, the first thing I published was a self-contained graphic novel, 144-page book, and it took me 5 years to finish that book. Now, I knew that if I were going to do another book, I didn't want to wait 5 years before people saw something from me again. So the choice to even do single issues was a choice of wanting to keep my work in front of people and not disappear for the people who supported my work and liked that first book. But secondly, I'm definitely a fan of, when you look at comics that have longevity, the idea of people repackaging them, redoing things in different formats. If I had Morningstar to do over again, I would have done the single issues only for conventions. And then when I published trades, what I would probably have done is, instead of having a book that has volume 1 that has the first 4 issues, then volume 2 that's the second 4 issues, I probably would have done a thinner, like a 48-page book that would have had like issues 1 and 2, and then have one that has issues 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6, and had 4 of those. And that's just a function of when you're selling stuff online and on Amazon, the more titles you have, the more of a pipeline it creates, and people can kind of go in and will read through a series. So I think that that's more of a marketing decision. But now, having put out enough books and seeing how, the traction it gets when you have a volume, when you have a series of books as opposed to a series of issues, even if that book is only 48 pages, people seem to be more drawn to that. Now, on top of that, I have never launched a Kickstarter before. I keep my eye on a lot of Kickstarters. I back a lot of Kickstarter campaigns. I think that I don't know if it's, let me put it this way, if it's not the future of indie comics publishing, it's going to be one of the pillars. There's lots of comics that, there's a lot of indie publishers that will run a Kickstarter campaign successfully, get it funded. They'll take their overstock and they'll be selling it, distributing it at conventions, in addition to soliciting it to Diamond. And a lot of times having a successful Kickstarter campaign is a great way to, that pre-awareness, just the fact that you ran a successful campaign, makes Diamond more likely to carry it. The fact that you've already got that pipeline of people that you've marketed it to, it means you've got a mailing list you can reach out to and let people know when it's in shops if you have something new or different to offer with it. So one of the things I'm also thinking about is that I am really big on thumbnailing. It's probably my favorite part of the entire creative process. Like, for every comp page I do, I usually end up doing I try to keep it to one sheet of 8.5 by 11 of thumbnails for each page I do, but sometimes I'll get into a complicated page that has a lot going on, and I'll end up doing 3 or 4 or 5 sheets of paper, just working out all different intricacies. Sometimes there's a certain prop that's going to show up in another page or an environment. So I'll do a page where I've got sketches on it. And what I'm thinking about, and this is a very long. All my answers are long-winded. I should warn you that it's too late. We're already in the mix.
No, it's all good.
But most of my answers are long-winded. When I finished the first issue of Morningstar and I looked at that, I realized that if I were to include my rough pencils and my thumbnails and the original script for the first issue, that was over 100 pages of content. So that's really like a trade. If you take the story plus everything it took for me to make that story, that's a trade's worth of material. So I have not committed to doing this yet, but I'm thinking, because I've never run a Kickstarter campaign before, what I might do is do a Kickstarter campaign that's more of an artist edition of issue 1, where it's the story and the script and all the stuff that I mentioned before. So it's all that material. We get that in a trade, and do a Kickstarter campaign just for that one book. And then if that book does well, do one of those for each of the 8 issues. Mind you, the whole thing is already done and completed. But I think that's the other thing about, as artists, I mean, any publisher will take any excuse to repackage something. Like the Batman Court of Owls. When they published the original issues and they published the trade, then they had there's an absolute edition, and then I have right there.
Just happen to be reading it right now.
That's so weird. You're reading it. It's right there at arm's length, at arm's reach. I have the Absolute Noir edition. So it's the one where it's lettered, but it's black and white over Capullo's pencils.
Wow.
And I mean, that's a nice, big, hardy book. But you look at that's multiple formats for one story. And it's a great story. I think that when I saw that gave me the first idea of, okay, I have the story. I'm going to finish it. It's going to be done in the format that I originated it. And I am going to put out a final 8th issue, but the print run of that is probably going to be really low. And it's really just going to be enough that if anyone were to order issues 5, 6, and 7, they could get a complete set. So it's more like making it available for people that have been buying it in the single issues and want to complete their set. Then I'm going to print enough for that. And then after that, it's just going to be the trade of volume 1, the trade of volume 2, until I launch this Kickstarter campaign. And then I'll run the Kickstarter campaign. If issue 1 does well, then I'll do the whole series. And then when that's done, then maybe somewhere down the line, because I figure the main thing that stopped me from diving into Kickstarter is that so many people tell me, running a campaign is like a full-time job. And on top of the day job that I have, I feel like I barely have enough time. I usually I make sure that I have 1 hour a day to draw my comic. At least once a day, I sit down at the drawing table and I work on it. And the reason why I feel like you have to have that level of discipline, otherwise life is just too complex. There's family obligations, there's work obligations, there's other creative opportunities that come up. There's so many things that will get in the way of you ever finishing something. So even if I'm not publishing as quickly as I want, if I know I'm making progress every single day, I will finish eventually.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, that's interesting. I think that this whole idea of you having the kind of artist edition, I think makes a lot of sense especially because you have a YouTube channel where you've talked about all of the intricacies of all of this already, and you've also you've got tutorials on how you write comics, how you do this, how you do that, and I'm sure that they would love to see that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know, I think that's really cool. Now, one thing, I was watching your latest video and I was noticing kind of the fact that you've done like such a long form kind of comic, and you've been very dedicated to finishing it. myself, I have a hard time focusing. I probably have some kind of creative ADHD, but I like shiny new projects, and most of my projects have been like 8 pagers, 4 pagers, 16. I did do something that was about 20 pages, but it's been all totally different kind of comics too. Like one thing I'm doing like an anthropomorphic thing. The next time I'm doing like a horror story. The next time, I'm doing superheroes. So like how you spoke about tenacity in your latest video, and I would love to hear you talk about like how do you just stick with it over such a long period of time to just keep pumping this thing out.
Well, what you call tenacity, my wife calls stubbornness. I am stubborn as all hell. Once you get a idea in front of me or something I'm really passionate about, I'm like a dog with a bone. I clamp down and I don't let go.
Mm,
Sometimes to my detriment, um, in the sense that you can pour a lot of time into something, and even if it's not necessarily working, you may just be like, I want to see. I just want to. Well, first off, I genuinely believe that no matter what you do, even if it doesn't come out successful, you learn by completing something. Every
definitely.
time yeah. I tell that to a lot of people, and the idea of doing shorter work. I often think that the dream is just doing a self-contained anthology where you're just creating your own worlds. Like imagine if it was Heavy Metal magazine, but it's all your work. Like I know
Mm,
Mobius has had some books collected, versions of his short stories, and it's just beautiful. Mobius is one of those guys who, he's done Western, he's done sci-fi, he's done fantasy, he's done all of this different types of work, and he's one of those creators where you can read his work and see all these different things. I think that I think it's a good approach to do smaller bite-sized chunks. My problem is my mind tends to think bigger and epic. Like Morningstar itself, yes, it's an 8-issue series. I began it as a 12-page short story that I wrote in college.
wow.
I got to the end I finished that project, and I realized that, it came from sort of a personal place, sort of an existential crisis, a dilemma that I was working out. And once I wrote the story and drew it, I was like, oh, well, this kind of answers the dilemma I had. But it raised another larger question, which Morningstar looks at, which is, what was Lucifer before he fell? Like, what was he like? Like what makes somebody who is supposed to be the brightest of all the angels become someone evil and dark?
Yeah.
And that is literally every project really it's just that graphic novel, and then my Morningstar, and then the first book I did, which is a psychological thriller called Eye of the Gods. But all of those and most of the projects I have start out as something that's potentially just a short story, and then it just starts growing and then growing. And in the process of me trying to, I have constantly been trying to pare things down so that all I want to do is just a series of 4-issue miniseries and collect it in a trade, and then move to a new story and do 4 issues in a trade, and then 4 issues in a trade, and the stories just keep growing. So when you mentioned about the fact of doing all these smaller projects and chasing the shiny objects, I chase those things too. What I do is I chase them into a net. I have a Google Doc that I call the idea file. And whenever I come up with an idea, I open it up and I write down the idea, and I put down the date that I put it in there, and then I close it and I don't look at it. And at this point, I've easily got more books than I could finish in 5 lifetimes. Okay, maybe not 5, but if I were to live for, say, 300 years, I think I might be able to get through all of them. But the problem is, in those 300 years, I would keep having new ideas.
Yeah. True. Well, that's definitely something I go through as well. Have you ever thought of having writing some of the stories and having somebody else do the art for some of them?
I have very much considered it. I think that the thing that stops me is I feel like, one, I would want to make sure that any collaborators I'd work with were well compensated. And right now, I'm not at the level of success where with my own work, where I could afford to bring on a staff. Like, not only do I pencil and ink my books, but like I mentioned, I letter them, I do the gray tones, I paint the covers digitally. So I'm a one man shop, and I'm lucky that I have the skill set to do all these things. Um, but I would want to make sure that I could be able to properly compensate anybody that worked on the project, and that just isn't feasible right now.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the drawing is the part I enjoy the most.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a friend of mine, Brandon Partlow. He's a creator of the Holmes and Watson crime series, and he does an interesting approach where he is the creator and he has the story, but he will hire out writers to script it for him. Kind of like when Mignola was first doing Hellboy and he had the premise, and then John Byrne just came into the script for it. He's completely capable of doing it, but it's just not what he wants to spend his time on it. He's running a larger publishing business, and he's building his own empire. He's got a lot more things drawing his attention, and he's set up a world in which, instead of doing the thing that he least wants to do, he farms that out and lets himself enjoy doing all the other things. And then, in the process, besides him drawing it, he's also managing his colorist, his letterers, and all the other people in his creative team. So it's all almost like he's got a lot more hats he's wearing. And I feel like every creator has to figure out what is their best workflow.
Yeah.
And it's different for every person. Like, for me, I think if anything, I probably am more of a cartoonist, in the sense that for me, the writing and the drawing are intimately linked. And it's really, part of it's me being a control freak, but part of it really is that I generally enjoy the whole process. So it would be really hard for me to farm out different pieces of it. I think that that's the smart play if you want to be a creator who is publishing with more frequency. I'm not anti-collaboration. I believe that collaboration with content creators is a great thing. I think that a lot of great work comes out of that. A lot of publications, allows you to produce more work quickly, and a lot of times that work is that it's that amalgam of the strengths of both creators. It's just, for me personally, I'm so in love with all the aspects of making comics, it's hard for me to do that. So someday maybe I will find a way to pry elements out of my hands, out of my claws.
Yeah.
But for now, it isn't necessarily healthy for me to want to do the whole thing myself, the level I have. But Wonder Comic creators are the healthiest people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can definitely relate with that. I tend to like to do all the things as well. But also, I am the type of person who wants to be prolific. And I think my desire to be prolific far outweighs my desire to have my hands in every single thing. So I think I actually will be moving forward in that way a little bit more. But that being said, I mean, it's good that if you feel that way, you do have that tendency to have that tenaciousness and that stubbornness. I titled this, building muscles, creative muscles. And the thing is I think through doing a long project like this and sticking with it, and even through doing any short comics, I think you already start to develop this, because a short comic is not an easy task. So, which is the muscle of patience. I'm sure you've built that muscle up. And something, when you were talking about tenacity, I thought it was interesting because somehow you still find a way to keep interest. And I'd love to, I heard you talk about it on your channel, but I'd love to for my audience to hear that as well. So talk a little bit about kind of how you maintain interest through working on the same project for such a long time.
Well, I think part of it is one, the fact that I love a good challenge, and making comics, any comic is hard. So having the fact that every single issue there's something new that's difficult for me, and the longer I work on it, the more I find that there's, oh, I wish I had designed this character's costume differently in issue 1. Oh, I've been drawing a Western for like 4 issues and I still have trouble drawing horses. I think part of it is that in every story I work on, there's always at least one. It's not one thing that I hate drawing. It's one thing that I have difficulty drawing, because I think that those challenges are what keep me engaged. Having things to do that you might think, some viewers might think, a comic creator who's also writing, a comic artist who's also writing the story is just going to put in the stuff that they want to draw. And there's some creators who do that. For me, I feel like the most well-rounded comic creators can draw anything. You should be able to do a sci-fi story. You should be able to do a crime drama. You should be able to do action. True, some people's styles and skill sets may lend themselves better to one genre than another. But I'd like to think that the skill set of a professional is that they can draw whatever the story demands. Now, I said that. I can't walk that walk yet. I can talk it, but I don't have that skill set yet. And that alone, in every issue, I can look at the backgrounds, the environments I'm drawing in the latest issue and compared to the ones I drew in the first couple of issues. And I'm like, I can see places where I've improved, had a better sense of staging, a better sense of making the environment, making them not feel like backgrounds, like a flat backdrop behind a character, but environments that characters are moving through. I think that I talk a lot on my channel also about figure drawing, because I take figure drawing classes regularly, and the same thing about figure drawing is true. You're never a master of it. You just keep leveling up. But each time you level up, if it's a video game, it's like each time you level up, the map expands. The world, you can see that much more around you. And with each issue of making comics, part of what's kept me engaged over many, many years of drawing the same story is that I keep getting better. And as I get better, I see more flaws, not in a bad way, not in a nitpicky way, not in a way in which I'm beating myself up, but I simply see that as I get better, I see that I can push farther. And that, to be honest, I think I would feel that way whether I'm working on a series of 8-page stories or 12-page stories or one-shots, or if I were working on like 100-page, 100 bullets type epic. That is what keeps me committed to continually making things. If I could have finished Morningstar in 4 issues, I would have. But the challenge in it was that it's got these 7 archangels. I realized that I could have finished it in 4 issues if I really focused just on Lucifer and his fall. But part of the challenge for me was doing an ensemble cast. I'd never done that before. So that is me pushing myself on a writing level. It is also pushing myself on an art level, because keeping the look of the characters consistent is challenging for me. I don't think I've mastered that. I mean, hell, just drawing their wings. I think I've changed the way I've drawn their wings in every single issue. And only now, like in issue 7, I'm like, I've got 2 issues to go. And here I figure out how to draw wings. And once I figure out how to draw wings, it's not that I figured out how to draw wings the right way. I figured out how to draw them in this story in a way that works for me. Right. So it's ongoing challenges. That's what keeps me driven. That's what keeps me focused. That's what keeps me, like you said, creative muscles. Whether I'm doing a short story or an epic, I'm building those muscles with every page, and that's what keeps me going. It's what keeps me driven.
Yeah. Are there any creative muscles or skills that through doing this process that have been kind of surprising, things you didn't even consider at first, and now you're like, oh, this is something that I is really helpful that you've learned.
Hmm. Well, that's, I'm trying to think I think that it's more that there's stuff that I've gotten better at and I've
Mm-hmm.
developed more of a healthy respect for, because I've always felt that that every phase of comics is important. The lettering is important. The coloring is important. I mean, even if you look at modern day mainstream comics, like color artists. I mean, I like the fact that people have stopped. I don't think that color is just a pejorative term, but the fact that they're referring to people as color artists more, where you see how much it adds and lends to a comic. Um,
Mm.
all of those phases. The editorial phase. I'd say that learning how to properly edit my comic has probably been the biggest challenge, because yes, that's the thing. All of the other phases, like I have a greater appreciation for writing, and I feel like there were none of the things in the book. You know, writing, penciling, inking. My book's black and white, but I do gray tones in it. Um, None of those things are things that it surprised. New aspects of it surprised me. It's more that I started out with the bare bones ability to do it. And then I've gotten a little bit better and a little bit better with each issue. I still don't feel like I'm the best letterist. I guess letterist. Letterer. I still don't feel like I'm the best letterer, but I feel like I'm slowly developing my own style that works with my writing style, because I tend to try and keep it down to one or two word balloons per panel. I like to have my characters kind of speak in short, punchy phrases. Not, maybe Hemingway-esque. What might be overkill, but more leaning to something towards like an Elmore Leonard. Although Elmore Leonard definitely has characters that can be loquacious and really go on and on. Like if you watch Justified, some of the characters can be very Shakespearean in their speech. But I'd say the editing was challenging for me in the sense that, like I mentioned before, lettering my books before I'm actually drawing them is so that I can sit down and read the lettered layouts before I start inking them and taking the page to a final and say, oh, wait, this panel doesn't lead properly into, this page doesn't lead into the next page properly. Oh, there's details here that don't make sense. Or, oh, I have this character appear here, but I didn't, I could have set them up better earlier, have a character make a mention to them, and then I'll go back and rewrite and change the dialogue and move things around. I think that it's a good skill set to be able to do all that in your head on the page before you get to the lettering. That said, I use every phase of comic creation as a chance to a pass to rewrite the dialogue. Because the way I write, I create basically a bullet pointed, a numbered outline. I just say pages 1 through 24, because I do 24-page issues. And then I just write down bullet points, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4, panel 5, however many panels. And I don't force myself to finish the script in the outline phase. If I think of a good line of dialogue, I put it in. If I don't think of a line of dialogue, then I just write down what the character is feeling, or I'll say what they're trying to, the idea they're trying to express. But I try to keep it just to like 1 or 2 sentences and really keep it bare bones. I get that done, and then I go do my thumbnails off of my script, off of my outline. And as I'm doing that, again, if I think of lines of dialogue, and I usually do when I'm doing thumbnails, I'll write those lines of dialogue down. By the time I'm ready to go to making that lettering template that I mentioned before, at that point, between my thumbnails and my outline, I've got most of the dialogue in there. If I don't, that's the time that I finish it. So I get all of that in there, and then once I've got that lettered version, I go back and I can edit it and look at it, make changes. Then I start doing my layouts. In the layout phase, again, I'm constantly looking at that dialogue. I'm tweaking things, changing this. I realize a line of dialogue is redundant, or that I need more art space for art, and I'll have to find ways to break it up and push the dialogue to the panel before or the panel after. All of those things. And I think that someone someone who works solely in writing probably benefits from the fact of learning to do all of that in their head before they hand their script into their editor. Where self-publishing, before they hand it off to their other teammates, they have to try and get all that done in their head. I mean, yes, you still will get a lot of creators, indie or mainstream, will get a chance to do a dialogue pass once they see the finished pencils or the finished inks and go back and tweak stuff. But in general, you're trying to write full script and have all of that there laid out in your head. Mine is probably a little bit more organic, and that speaks back to me saying about how difficult it would be to have collaborators because it all feels connected to me.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting. Have you ever found that you've had to actually redraw some panels or redraw even a page or something in the editing stage?
In issue 7, I had to put in 2 splash pages. Normally, I limit myself to 1 splash page per issue because I want the splash pages to have impact. And the problem with this is that the page that I intended to be a splash page, it didn't fall on the page turn where I wanted it to. I mispaginated when I was doing my thumbnails and doing my rough layouts.
Yep.
So then I had to go back and say, if I really want this story point to end to be at this particular page, what it was that I needed to insert a splash page because I'd already figured out what was my 1 splash page in that issue, but there was an emotional beat in issue 7 that was important enough. It was the death of one of the major characters, and it was important enough that I felt like it warranted a splash page. So I said, all right, well, how am I going to work this out? So what I said was, all right, well, what I'll do is I'll add 2 splash pages. So I had the 1 additional splash page I was going to add, and then another one to balance that out. But the problem then became, and I figured I could just put in the back a couple of rough sketches in the back to fill that out. But one of the splash pages that I threw in, that was where I miscalculated the pagination. I'm like, all right, well, now I got to put 4 splash pages in here, and it just became a whole mess. It became a whole mess because I had to have a splash page for one character's death, and I could have just kept things easy and said, all right, I'm just not going to do that as a splash page and just leave it the way I originally laid it out. But we mentioned tenacity earlier on. That's one of the cases where that tenacity will get me in trouble. So yeah, but a funny other thing is that there's a point in the story, and you'll see this when you see the trade, because in the trade it has a preview for the issue that comes after it, and that preview after it has an important plot point. And the reason why I wanted to include that important plot point in that trade is because A, it's a preview that whets your appetite for the next issue, but B, I realized that as you got deeper and deeper into the story, Lucifer has a secret, and that secret explains his motivations, and it makes you understand his actions and why he ends up making the choices he does that leads to his fall. And I had intended for that secret to be revealed on the final page of the final issue. Here's the problem, though. As I started working on this is a spoiler for issue 7, guys. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but if you've read past issue 5, then anybody who's watching, if they've read the series, they've read past issue 5, they'll know what the secret is. I realized the problem was that if the reader didn't know this secret, they didn't understand Lucifer's motivations. And if a reader can't understand your main character's motivations, then they can't connect to it. It's going to take them out of the story. The story stops making sense. Like, I realized that in my mind, knowing what all the characters know, the way the story unfolded makes sense. But for a reader who doesn't know the things I know, they're going to feel disconnected. So I actually finished issue 4. I took I want to say 3 or 4 months, and I rewrote the whole last 4 issues completely.
Oh wow.
And I started that with that secret that was going to be the spoiler at the end. What happens if I reveal that early on? And in issue 5, and the rest of the series is about the repercussions
Yeah.
of that coming out. And I realized that if I had the whole story to do over again, and this is one of those things where it's an editing thing, and that's where it's useful to have another person's set of eyes on a project. But if I had the whole story to do over again, I would have put that reveal at the end of issue 1. And I would have done the thing of, that whole thing in the Orson Welles movies, Touch of Evil, where in the beginning there's that bomb in the car, and the whole tension of the opening is, when is that bomb going to go off?
Yeah.
I was trying to write The Usual Suspects, where there's a big twist at the end, and someone's like, oh my God, this story isn't what I thought it was at all. Sometimes you have to realize it's one thing to punch above your weight class. It's another thing to step in the ring and get pummeled. I couldn't pull off what I was trying to, but at least I had the common sense to realize that and course correct before I got to the end of the story. And I still feel like it's satisfying. But if I had the whole story to do over again, it really would have been about the tension of when is everyone else going to find out what Lucifer knows. And as people find out, how that unraveling affects the rest of the world and other characters around them. So, that's something there where the editing process, it wasn't a drawing issue, but it was definitely an issue where in the creative process, I realized, oh wait, I need to make a massive course correction.
Yeah. It's totally true. Like, when you're creating a story, like you feel like you want to have these surprises, but you're right. Sometimes, like I remember in some writing book or something, they were talking about like, two people having a conversation. Well, you don't realize how tense the situation is if you don't show the fact that under the table the person is pointing a gun at the other person. So like, but you almost want a surprise, but you can't, because if you do that, then everything that they say now takes on a much greater weight of what's going to happen and stuff. So like you said with the bomb example as well. Now, one thing that you mentioned earlier that is interesting is that you take for one page, you do like a page full of thumbnails, and you really love the thumbnail process. Now, I'm a person who hates the thumbnail process, and to me, like, a whole page of thumbnails for one page sounds like a new level of hell to me. Is there any possible way that you can convert me to why making thumbnails is like your favorite process? I'm curious for you to dig a little bit into that, because I need to build that muscle.
Well, I'll tell you, because I'm sitting at my drawing table as we're talking. This right here, this is my stack of thumbnails for the final issue. And it's a 40-page issue, and this is probably it probably is about 40 sheets of paper, but that's because there's some pages where I'm able to fit like 2 or 3 pages in there. But for me, the reason why I love thumbnails is because it's for the same reason, like when you do a rough sketch and, when you tighten it up, it looks stiff. And, you're like, you can't get that sense of that gesture and that life and that magic in it. Thumbnails are the gesture drawing of an issue. I haven't screwed it up yet. I haven't written myself into a corner. And if I do run myself into a corner, the beauty of the thumbnail is that I can, like, for instance, let me see if I've got a page here that has multiple. Okay. Sometimes as I'm working on it, I'm not sure how clear this will show up on the camera, but like I'll have a couple of pictures of what's actually going on, like story-wise, I can go in there and, put a couple of panels and this and that in there. But I will go in and I'll do multiple layouts. And I'll say, well, wait, does this work better with 5 panels or 6? Does this work better with all horizontal tiers or vertical tiers? Does this work with a 9-panel grid or what have you? And it's the fact that with just a few marks, I can explore all of the different possibilities. It's not a matter of I need to get it right in this sketch and this is the page and then move on to the next one. With thumbnails, I can explore every possibility. I can sit there and, I mean, I think for a lot of creators, there's that problem of sometimes noodling. Whatever stage we enjoy the most, we'll noodle and we'll just keep working on it and dragging it out. If you're going to noodle, I say noodle in the thumbnail stage, because that's the place where it's like, all right, I can literally, on one sheet of paper, if I drew them small enough, I could fit, conceivably a whole issue's worth of thumbnails on one sheet of paper. They'd be very, very tiny, and they really would be nothing but stick figures. But you could do maybe not 24 pages. You could probably fit 20 little boxes in there that are a rough layout of the panel composition for like a 20 pages, story pages. The reason why it takes so many issues for me is because I will sit down and I'll take one page and I'll say, well, like I said, I'll work out, even though I generally go into each page knowing how many panels I want, I will look and see how the story unfolds on the page. And I'll say, maybe I do combine these panels. Maybe I do take this particular panel and make this taller. Maybe this one is going to be like 4 or 5, vertical panels to have a quick staccato action. So I'm really trying to dissect and move around. It's not necessarily that I'm trying to do like splashy layouts, because to be honest, I keep it very grid based, but I am still thinking about either 9-panel grids or 3 tiers or slices of quick time. So for me, it's about experimenting with the tempo and the pacing as much as it is experimenting with the composition of the page as a whole and the composition of the individual artwork within the page. Because I'm also deciding, well, I may thumbnail it out and I'll realize, oh, most of these are medium shots or full shots. Where am I going to put my close-ups? Or if it's a conversation, we don't want, it's like the Wallywood, 22 panels that always work. You don't want to just have it all talking heads. So then I'm thinking, all right, I may have these characters have a conversation, but in the middle of the page, I'm going to make that a long horizontal tier, and I'm going to show them like on a landscape. You just got the balloons coming down to the tiny little figures and show the whole environment just to break up the flow. It's the ability in thumbnails to see all of the possibilities that the story could be. Kind of like in filmmaking, how they say that the film is made 3 times. It's made in the screenplay, it's made in the shooting, and then it's made again in the editing room where they're actually editing all the pieces together. This is sort of like me doing the editing room before I've drawn a single page. Like the same way that Disney Pixar, the way that they'll do animatics and they'll do a feature, they'll do the whole film with temp voices with people that are on the film acting out all the dialogue, and they'll do that and they'll make the film 5 times, 5 different stories.
Wow.
Feature length, you can sit there and watch it in storyboard format. That's kind of what thumbnails are for me. And I do probably drag the process out longer than is healthy, but again, noodling. But it's that freedom to get everything as close to what I want as possible. I don't think that I am capable of doing comics straight ahead, where there are people who will sit down, they'll do a thumbnail, they'll draw that page. They move to the next page, they do their thumbnail, they draw their page. I couldn't do that. I mean, I would claw my eyes out. I would hate everything in it, because I'm constantly seeing places when I'm done with my thumbnails. I see places where I can move something in and I can foreshadow it, or I can put a minor prop in there. I can do the Chekhov's gun, where I've got the thing that appears on panel 3 that's super, super important. That's on page 3, and it's super, super important on page 20. Like all of those kind of things. I don't generally think of those out of my head as I'm going. I think of them when I see it all laid out in front of me.
Interesting. Um, yeah, and so as I'm looking at your page with the thumbnails, it's interesting because they don't look like what I typically see people do for thumbnails. You have a page and it looks like, and I imagine probably the different pages, they're not always like this. It's probably all different things that you do. But you're playing with layouts, which I think you talked about there, and that makes a lot of sense. But there's no figures or anything in those layouts. They're literally just different kind of grids you can use. And then there's a lot of words there as well. And then it looks like you have maybe individual scenes kind of planned out, like or panels kind of planned out, which I think is really interesting because to me, I get overwhelmed because I feel like in this little tiny square, I have to figure a lot of stuff out. Like there's just a lot of decision making, and that's what is hard in comics, is that decision making. Like, who says putting this panel here and that panel there, or this shape there, or who says what's right? You're the one who has to say it. And so that, and then also, like, because I will sometimes do like 2 or 3 for each page, for a certain page, but I'd still draw like the little figures and all the stuff within it, but I also can't really read it afterwards because there's too much marks in there. So I'm curious, what your thought process is when you're approaching that. Like, you kind of already said a lot of it. I'm also curious what kind of notes are in there. Is it notes about the flow and things you were just talking about, or are you talking, or is there dialogue or notes like, remember to make Gabriel's hair this way or something, like, what is it?
It is all of those things. It's all of those things. It's exactly what you mentioned. I mean, specifically when you were talking about the fact of sometimes the thumbnails being too small to even really tell. Like, at the moment you draw it, you know what it is. But if you were to come back and look at it, like when you're finished with the whole issue and you're ready to, or the story and you're ready to start drawing, you'll come back and you'll be like, what is that? The notes are, yes, definitely dialogue. And sometimes I'll be rewriting the dialogue as I'm doing the thumbnails. I'll think of, like, once I do a rough sketch of it, I'm like, oh wait, the dialogue should really be this, and I'll end up like, there's definitely pages. There's one sheet of paper I've got here where it's like 5 pages of me rewriting a scene. I could have very easily just opened up a Word doc and typed that out, but instead I just hand wrote my way working through the scene. And the reason for that is because I wanted to be able to jump back and forth between the words and the pictures, because I thought I had something that worked visually. But as I was working through that process and adding the dialogue, I might come back and say, you know what? Let me just draw a little picture of a character's head under this line of dialogue with an eyebrow raised or with a frown. Or maybe I'll decide that on this particular line, I'm going to have them in a silhouette with their head bowed. So it's like, again, that cartoonist aspect of neither writer nor illustrator, but I feel like I'm merging both of them. But also, like you said, when you've got all these tiny pictures, I will write underneath there, like, this is what's happening. And I'll just make a list of, like, if I've got a thumbnail and it's got like 6 panels on that page, I will underneath write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I will write down what's happening in each of those pictures, because I know that I may come back and look at it later and I can't tell. And if there's a particular image that I look at it and I'm all, if the numbered list isn't going to jog my memory, the fact that you saw some panel layouts that were just blank boxes, then there were some that looked like comic pages that did have little comic pictures in them, and then some were just a simple scene, like just a panel. That's where I come back and I will draw, this is what this actual panel is, because the thumbnail doesn't describe what's in my head or what I want to communicate. So I will make a separate picture just to draw that. Or, the ideal way that I like to approach the thumbnails is on any given page or set of pages I'm working on, I sit down, I've got that blank sheet of paper, and I will draw a rectangle that's comic page proportioned. And it'll maybe be like, 2 inches wide by 3 inches tall. So, a fairly small drawing. And I will try to draw the panels and then draw just tiny thumbnails that describe what it is. And on a good day, I will get that right. And then I'll just move on to the next page. And then I will have a page that has like maybe, 4 or 5 pages worth of thumbnails on it. More often than not, I'll draw all of that. But in the little pictures I drew, 3 out of 6 panels, I didn't like the way they came out. Or I'm all, oh, this should be from this different angle. Now that I see how the whole page looks, I realize, oh, wait, I need to move this character this side instead of that side. Oh, I do need to vary it up and have some distant shots or some close shots. Or, oh, I forgot to put an establishing shot in. I got to put that in. And a lot of these decisions, like I definitely understand the frustration of being overwhelmed with decisions. But the thing that you see that can give a sense of frustration, I see it as it's liberating me to correct all of these mistakes in this raw form. It's me being able to see, like the fact that I will draw that first thumbnail, and then all of the other versions of that same page I'll draw next to it are me saying, instead of I need to figure out what the right decision is, I just draw all the variations and I look at them and say, what looks the best? What feels like what the story should feel like? So in that sense, that's when I start relying on the creative intuition, as opposed to saying this page mathematically should work and this should break down to this number of panels and should feel this way. It should be this clear. I will literally have just 3 thumbnails, 3 different versions of the same page in thumbnails right next to each other. And I just look at them and say, what looks right? What feels right? Again, clarity for me, I will sacrifice a cool shot for sake of clarity. I definitely want, I definitely try to go for making it something like, I'm a big fan of Alex Toth. And, he's one of those guys who, his drawings are beautiful, but they're deceptively simple, but it's because he's just making the storytelling clear. And I certainly don't think I've achieved that level of skill in my visual storytelling. But for as much as we talk about comics being a visual medium, and it is, I think that the art always has to be in service to the story. Otherwise, just make a beautiful book cover. Just make a beautiful illustration. I do a lot of standalone art pieces that I just sell as prints and sell the originals of. And I try to have a sense of narrative and storytelling in my standalone images, even if they're not from a comic. But for me, it always comes back to, whatever I'm putting on the page, is it servicing the story? And that's where the thumbnails are all about it. And one small thing I was going to mention, I ink with a brush. Inking with a brush is challenging. It took me years to figure out the trick, which is just use small brushes. But the other thing, a friend of mine, a fellow artist named Gregor, he was in a figure drawing class with me, and we were talking comics process years ago. And he told me that if I want to get better at inking with a brush, write with a brush. So I do my thumbnails with a brush instead of doing it with a ballpoint pen, or with pencil. And I do it because if I'm only inking every few months because of the time it takes me to finish an issue, at least if I'm thumbnailing with a brush, it keeps me from getting rusty. Keeps my hand fresh with that. And along with that, I can very easily see someone doing their thumbnails with a brush and then grabbing a pen to write their notes. But no, I rewrite dialogue and I make all of the notes that I have. I do all of that with a brush. And it is true. I have found that, and I think that this is true, I've even found working digitally now, because I switched to doing digital layouts with this latest issue. And I found that making notes on a stylus on an iPad, that actually helps enhance my control. It helped me learn to control the iPad and the Apple Pencil better. So I think that's true for anything, whether it's you're looking at charcoal pencil. I don't know if it would work with oils, but I think for any other challenging medium you're trying to learn, writing with that tool, writing is already something that even if you have atrocious handwriting, it's something that we're used to doing. We're used to having a certain amount of control. So we know what the letters should look like. We're not judging it the way we're looking at a drawing. When we do a bad drawing with a new tool, we think, oh, I'm a bad artist. We're being self-critical. I can't draw, or I can't make this thing come out. We're not thinking about the fact that we just haven't developed the control over the tool. It's not really a matter of whether we're a good artist or a bad artist. Yeah. When you're writing notes, it takes that self-critical judgment that artists often have, takes that out of the equation.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think I mentioned it on a recent video, but you probably remember because you go way back with the comic community. A guy named Luis Escobar, you remember?
Yes, I do.
He's still doing his thing. Another guy who I think is very tenacious because he won't stop. He just keeps working on his thing. But one thing that I think is so interesting that he does is, he takes the teaching people how to draw, he takes that to a way earlier stage than any art book takes it. And what he says is anybody can really draw, because if you know how to write, you can draw, because all drawing is 3 different lines: a straight line, a C curve, and an S. That's it. And you already can do that with writing. All it is no matter what kind of amazing art you see, or when it comes to line drawing, especially and sketching, all it is a ton of those in different configurations, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. And like what you're saying, that I've never thought of that, but like getting good at using a brush, writing is a perfect way to make that happen. So so I agree with my buddy Peter, who says this. So yeah, I also really love that you said that it's like the gesture drawing. Another person that you probably remember is Raul Aguirre Jr.
Oh yeah.
Man versus Art podcast and all that. And he's the one who didn't show me. I saw it through the podcast, heard it through the podcast, but I didn't realize that it really actually does matter what order you do things when it comes to drawing like a figure. And it literally is very important that you get that gesture right first, right out the gate. Do a good gesture, get a good gesture, and then you start working on the form. And then last but not least, you do the detail. And it's totally true that when you're a beginning artist, you thumb through your comics, you're like, oh, look at all this detail in this Greg Capullo drawing, and whoever else, and you just start with the detail. You start like putting in the little eye, and you put like all the little cool lines around the face and this and that, and then you come and you look away and you're like, well, there's a lot of lines there, but it doesn't quite look as good as that. I'm looking at, and it's because you don't know how to structure a figure. You go with that gesture. You got to get that life first, and then you get the forms. You make sure that the forms work within space, and that you're actually creating that illusion that us artists create. Even though it's on a 2D surface, it looks like it's popping out, and then you go in with the detail, and that's like the least important part, but it's the flourish of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because I 110% agree with everything you just said. I have seen drawing instructors. There's a drawing instructor out here in California named Glenn Villapoo, who teaches at the Animation Guild in Burbank, and I've seen him draw. I've taken one of his workshops before, but I've seen him draw before. He's one of those guys who he can sit put a circle at the top, draw a line, and then just work his way down and just draw the whole figure. And it's kind of like Tron. We're just watching go zzz, just working his way all the way down. And there are artists who can start with a finger and work the way all the way up the whole form and across, like Kim Jong-il. Yeah. He's one of those guys who is the supernatural freak of natures where they can just start with one piece and they can see the whole figure. So they don't like, but the thing about it is when they have this capacity, it's not that they aren't drawing a gesture. It's that they've been doing it for so many years and they've so mastered the craft. And part of it is also creative visualization, which I haven't mastered that level yet, but it's that they can see the whole drawing. So when they're putting the lines down, it's almost like they're just revealing the drawing that's already there in their imagination. Yeah. So they can't just start at one place and let it come out. The idea of starting with the gesture and like trying to get a spine or a long line of action and then building it over and saying, oh, wait, the knee's over here. Oh, wait, knee should be a little bit lower. Put this down. Let's turn the foot this way. No, wait, let's turn it that way. Let's tilt this shoulder and make it so that they're twisting a little bit more. And those things in the gesture that I think that the approach that you or I may come at, that's more of someday maybe I'll get to the point where I see all of it in my head and I can just put the lines down. But until then, gesture, adjust, draw, erase, and just try to capture the energy of what's happening, what I'm trying to show and tell and describe in the action. So
yeah, totally. And yeah, it's those people who have put in those miles, and like you said, the visualization. Another guy who does that is Dan Frega, and he actually describes the process. He's learned the art of visualization and stuff, and it's really interesting to hear him talk about that. But he literally trained himself to kind of visualize in that way, like Kim Jong-il does and stuff. So I think it's interesting that there's maybe a little bit of a shortcut, but when it really comes down to it, you just have to have put in lots of hours and then you can be Jack Kirby, who doesn't even put a thumbnail down and goes from one corner to the other corner and makes a page, so
I love that old Kirby story. I think that he was working on Captain America and Joe Sinnott, he's drawing something, and he goes and he grabs a wrist, and then Joe Sinnott's like on the other side inking, and so I was like, hey, what are you doing over there? He's like, I'm erasing. He's like, you get paid to pencil. You don't get paid to erase.
That's awesome.
I'd like to think that that at some point there will be a tipping point or a critical mass in my mind where I'll see all of the zeros and ones of the matrix, and then I can just draw anything, and I can imagine anything, and I can do stuff from every angle, and I can imagine like, oh, I can hold an entire comic issue in my head, and I can see all the layouts, and I can make I should need to adjust this on this panel and that on this page, and see it all. Like, I think that there are some people who have some particular savant visualist skill set, both artists and writers. There are some people who are incredibly prolific because they can imagine the whole chessboard. And I think that that's something that I think it would be useful if all comic creators had that skill set. But sometimes it's not necessarily the skills you're born with, it's the skills that you develop. And maybe I'll never develop that skill set, but I'm going to work my ass off in terms of all the other things. And I'm going to try and make up with, again, the tenacity and the hard work. I'm going to try and bring all the craft that I can and not rely on whatever talent. I don't think that talent's a myth, but I think that talent is a very, very small piece of a creative person's work. And more often than not, it's not just the work ethic. It's being so in love with whatever the thing is that you're making that you don't get exhausted by it the way other people might. There will be a lot of people who are like, I'm done. I'm throwing in the towel. I've had enough. I don't need, even if I did like it, I used to like it. I don't like it no more. but it's the people who have that timeless love with their creative process. That those are the ones that stick with it, and in sticking with it, I don't know if you listen to the Comic Lab podcast, but they're it's two of the guys that used to be on Webcomics Weekly. If you're familiar with that, but one of the guys, Brad Geiger, says you can't get worse at something you do every day.
That's a good point.
And I love that quote. So yeah,
totally. Well, I kind of agree. I think I pretty much 100% agree. Like there is maybe a certain thing called talent, but it's not the most important ingredient necessarily. And I agree, that you can really develop whatever it is you need to develop. I feel personally like anybody can draw. I actually had this whole like idea of what talent is, and I called it DAP, like, giving somebody DAP. This is how you get DAP in the art community, basically. So it's DAP. And the first one was desire. Well, hopefully I can remember them all. The first one was desire. So it's like one thing I feel like with talent is it's actually more about just wanting to do it. I think that people who say they can't draw, it's more that they just don't really want to that bad. Like I wanted to so much that I kept doing it since I was in nursery school, and I never stopped, but they stopped at some point. They didn't really want to do it that much, or maybe they felt discouraged because somebody else was doing it better. And it just, other things were more important to them. It's totally fine. So to me, desire is a huge part of if you have talent or not. And then the next one would be appreciation. That's just like the fact that, you kind of have a certain taste. Like I like Greg Capullo's art or whoever else's art. And so that kind of taste, it kind of brings in, it informs like what, like kind of your direction to a certain degree. And then the P is just it's practice. and so you have the desire, and then you have a certain taste, and then you practice. But I actually called it play because it makes it less intimidating. Because really, if you think about practice, everybody always says, how do you get better at art? Practice, practice, practice. Of course, that's obvious. But like, if you think of it as almost like you said, like challenges, I mean, Inktober gets a lot of people making marks on pages who maybe would have procrastinated the last few years, but they instead did this challenge every year, and it was a fun way. They were playing, in some ways. And I mean, even Peter here, Empyrean Bull, he has been, this guy, you probably don't know Jeremy, but this guy, he's in our Discord, and he has made, like, since last year, Inktober, he's made, I don't know how many comics. He's probably made like at least 10 comics. They're like mini comics and stuff like that. And it's probably more, like probably a lot more actually, but he just pumps it out. And it's like, because he did this challenge called Inktober and he had fun doing it, he just kept going. And he never stopped, and he got hooked on the comic part of it, and he just kept making. He made just like a page every day, and it's like that. To me, that's what talent is. You have the desire, you have a certain appreciation for maybe a certain, that kind of guides the direction, and then you just practice, you play with it, and then people start saying, "Oh, well, you're talented, and I'm not." It's not. You could be too, if you really wanted it.
Yeah. I mean, and part of it, I probably more than is healthy, share a lot of bad artwork. and I do that because I don't want people to feel like they have to be perfect. Because that level of perfection, that bar, is, I think, what intimidates a lot of people. they try something and it doesn't come out right, and they're like, well, I'll try again because I'm not a quitter and it doesn't come out right. Maybe they'll try 3 times. And you try 3 times and it sucks, and they're like, I'm just not good at this, I give up. Whereas, when I show someone, 5 pages worth of thumbnails for one comic page, the lesson there is that, only one of these thumbnails actually works. The rest were me floundering and flopping and all over the place. And the story didn't work, and the characters didn't make sense. The composition didn't read well. And I share a lot of figure drawing work on my page because I definitely feel like I still have a lot to learn about drawing the human form, the human figure. But I'm very grateful whenever someone says something nice about one of my drawings. I want people to understand that for every good drawing I make, I usually do 50 to 100 bad ones. And I don't say that to discourage people. I don't say it with sort of like the whole, you got to toughen up and do your pencil mileage. It's not that. It's that you have to give yourself permission to do the bad things in order to get to the good. You have to give yourself permission. The biggest thing I try to tell people is that your bad drawings are your best learning tool. Because a bad drawing is a big neon sign pointing at the things that you don't know. The quick example I'll try to give is, I remember one particular figure drawing class I was doing. The model took a pose and her knee was at a foreshortened angle coming at me. And I drew it and it didn't come out well. And it was like 5-minute poses. So they were short poses. And we finished it. And I didn't nail the pose. The model moved on, did other poses. And in between the model break, I was kind of sketching, trying to, look at that and say, well, wait, what is that I didn't get about it? Why is this not quite right? Later on in the night, the model did not take the exact same pose, but her knee was in a pretty close to the same position again, facing the same way. And I drew it again, and it still sucked. And that's when I went, I don't have a good understanding of how the knee is put together. Fortunately, I had an anatomy book in my bag, and I pulled it out, and I did some studies, and by the end of the class, the model had one more pose, and it was better. But it still made me realize how much I didn't understand that particular anatomical aspect. And I take that to every single thing that I draw. Whenever I draw something, if it doesn't come out right, I don't get frustrated or angry at myself. I look at the fact that this is a chance for me to continue expanding my learning and growth. And people are always saying, when someone is starting out in art and they're still excited, but they're starting to get frustrated, they always say, I don't know how to get better. How do I get better? How do I get better? I say, look at your bad drawings. That's how you get better. I've got a figure drawing instructor named Carl Ganas that I've studied with for probably as long as I've been self-publishing. So probably like a decade now. And one of the things he told us early on was, take your bad drawings home, study them, redraw them, analyze them. And because, again, stubborn, I didn't start doing that for probably a good 3 years of doing figure drawing classes. I just came in, did my class once a week, drew from the model for 3 hours, went home. You do that for 3 years, you improve, you get better. But the first semester of classes where I said, all right, at least once or twice a week, I'm going to take out my drawings from class and I'm going to analyze them, I immediately saw a quantum leap. Wow. It just, because it's the simple thing that it's like athletes playing a sport. When they're out on the field and they're playing, they practice those plays hundreds and hundreds of times. They've done drills over and over again. Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant sitting out practicing free throws, not during practice, but just doing it over and over again, practicing the skill, trying to get it. And they'll miss shots and they'll make shots and just keep practicing until they can get consistency. That same thing of And again, it's not pencil mileage. It's, are you analyzing the decisions you make? And when you're in, believe it or not, when you're in a life drawing class, that's almost like being on the field playing a sport, in the sense that you're in the moment. The model's there in front of you. She's only going to be there. He or she's only going to be there for a limited amount of time, and you're on the clock, and you just got to do what you do right there. If you're having troubles, you need to do your best to figure out the spot. And when it's over, it's the next pose.
Yeah.
But when you have that time afterwards to come back and it's like watching those game tapes, watching those replays, and saying, "Oh," and you can take that drawing that came out like crap and say, do another drawing right next to it, almost like the thumbnails, and say, well, what would happen if I had put this line here instead of there? What would happen if I made the hips a little wider instead of narrower? What would happen if I had made this arm more in proportion, stretch this out? And much like my sheets of thumbnails, I will sit there and I'll have the same pose drawn 5 times on a single sheet of paper, where I'm just looking at it and trying to understand what I don't understand.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah, and I totally, again, I agree about making bad drawings. I think it's great, actually. It was life changing when I found out that idea and started to understand it. When it comes to my sketchbooks, I went from buying sketchbooks and just getting inspired and drawing a cool picture, and then maybe drawing another 2 or 3 cool pictures, and then next thing I know, I'm buying another sketchbook because I like sketchbooks, apparently. And but I have a lot of blank pages in my last sketchbook, and so I did that for a while, and it's because I was being too precious with it. I didn't realize that you're supposed to put that's like a really good place to file all your bad drawings. So that's where I organize all my bad drawings. I just put them all right there. And another person that goes back, Brandon Dayton, not too long ago, a few years ago, he did a challenge. I don't know if he's still continuing it, but the summer sketchbook challenge. And he said, he took like a thick sketchbook, and he's like, we're going to complete this in a month. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. By then I already had that idea. That thing, I did it too. And I think I got done a couple days early. And, it's filled with a lot of really bad gesture drawings. There's only a few like decent drawings in there, so it's good. And I like what you're saying about, analyze the bad drawings. Sounds like it takes some courage, and but if you're saying like it really makes you kind of level up, I'm definitely interested in trying that. And maybe once COVID's over, I can maybe get into some life drawing classes, because that's one thing I haven't done too much of, and they always say you got to do that, so.
Well, it's funny. I went to a fine art college, and it was geared towards the art gallery scene and fine art, as opposed to there was no illustration program. So the point is that it taught me how to think about ideas, speak about the different premises, and be able to explain why I'm making the art that I'm making, being able to write an artist statement. It was very great on the creative and intellectual side, but they really did not care if I could draw my way out of a paper bag. I did take figure drawing classes in college, but I didn't enjoy them because I was always bad at it. And then over the years, once I got out of school and I was kind of beginning my artistic career, I would occasionally take figure drawing workshops and take like a 6-week class or a 12-week class or something. And again, I still wasn't very good at it, and I always liked what I drew out of my imagination better. But at a certain point, I realized that I was always going to be bad at it if I never practiced it. So, around the time that I had started working intently on my first graphic novel, that was when I really began taking figure drawing classes regularly. And after like one semester of that dedicated study, One, I could see the difference. But two, I realized, you know how it is. Well, I think I mentioned before, it's the level up thing. Once I finished that one class, I could see how far I had to go. And I realized that there is no finish point. There is no end point where you're like, all right, I can draw everything now. Drawing.
I don't know. I think Kim Jong-un might have got there, but not many other people have.
Well, if only I had his talent. But I realized that it's like lifting weights. The more reps you do, the stronger you get. The less you do, the weaker you get. There's never a point where it's not a point where you've lifted enough weight. You're like, all right, I'm strong now. If you stop, you'll get weaker.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized I needed to make it an ongoing practice and part of my life. And it really has become just a consistent thing that I'm always working for and training and practicing. So it's had a big impact on my comic making. It's had an impact on learning how to write, because being forced to really grapple with, and having a good instructor made a big difference, but being forced to really grapple with and learn how to analyze a creative problem gave me a template for analyzing and learning other creative problems. Like, I wrote my first graphic novel. I had a story in my mind that was very clear, and it was kind of like I was lucky that story was as clear. In working on Morningstar, that's when I realized, oh, I've spent most of my life learning how to draw. I need to spend that much time learning how to write. And that unto itself is a whole nother craft. And I'm still trying to find more time to spend working on writing. Like, my big goal once I finish Morningstar is to change my schedule. And I think that in the end, I may end up putting out comics at the same pace. But my goal is to make sure that I spend at least 30 minutes to an hour a day writing. So, or maybe it's something where for every hour I draw, I have to spend 30 minutes a day writing. Right. And however I end up breaking that up, I'll break it up. But another gap has been that, I'll write something and then I go and I draw it. Like, even though I outlined all of Morningstar, part of the other thing was I outlined all of it, and I had a full script for the first two issues, kind of a looser script for issues 3 and 4. Then issues 5, 6, and 7, I just had the outline with little bits of dialogue here and there. It was the rest of the issues were Marvel style, and that was another thing where I realized, nope, I really should have nailed down the entire thing. If I spend 30 minutes a day every day writing, then I never cool off. I never have that thing. Anytime you're beginning a project, whether it's a writing project or a drawing project, if you haven't been doing it for a while, there's that whole starting the motor up, getting it going. Yeah. There's that It's like, what is it? Stephen Pressfield says in The War of Art. He talks about resistance. Every time you're making something, there's that inertia. If you haven't been doing something, of getting it going. For me, because I'm an artist first, and I came to writing later, I feel far more inertia with writing than I do with drawing. But if I get myself to the point, I feel no inertia with drawing because I draw every day.
Yeah.
If I get myself to the point where I'm writing every day, then I don't fear it anymore. And the same way that I'm not afraid to do a page full of thumbnails, because I'm like, hey, if it doesn't work, do another page. I'll figure out what works eventually because I'm working towards it. When I can get to that point with writing, where I'm fearless, where I'm willing to try different stuff, where I'm willing to look at something and say, this page will work, but let me try one more page, not because I have to, but just because I want to see if I can make it better. When I can get to that point with my writing as well as my drawing, that's when I really feel like I'll be liberated and freed up. And then I don't have to have like a gap. The reason why I mentioned the gap thing is because when I got to later issues of Morningstar, yes, I took a big chunk to stop and rewrite the last 4 issues. But even with this last issue, I still had to go through and do another dialogue pass before lettering it again. And if I'm constantly writing every single day, and that just means if I've got a 4-issue miniseries I plan to do after this, I just work on that. And while I'm doing some art prints and some single pieces, and then when it's all ready and done, I start working on that new series. and I can just go back and forth between drawing and writing and drawing and writing. And this way, well, if I've got a new series, it takes longer to draw. I can be working on that new series. I may have that next 4-issue miniseries done, and then maybe I'll go back and I'll just do rewrites because I have the time to do rewrites because I'm still drawing the thing. And I'll just tighten it up and say, well, what happens if I change this character motivation? What happens if I move this piece around? What happens if I put some foreshadowing in here? What happens if I add some more interesting backstory? And just I can rewrite it until I have something that I feel is bulletproof. Because I think for a lot of us as indie creators, it takes a while to get to that thing where we really feel like this. I always like to say that I stand behind everything that I create, that I feel like the writing is the best I was able to do at that time, the drawing is the best I was able to do at that time. None of it's perfect.
Yeah.
But I think that there are people who, and I don't think it's necessarily even rare in comics because the comics industry is just filled with so many amazing, talented people. There are creators who, once they've got their chops and they've really, honed their craft, they'll make a book and they're like, it's good. And I'm not being egotistical. They're all, the writing is good and the art is good because I know my craft and I worked on it and I honed it to be good.
Right.
I haven't reached that point yet, but what I want to do is get to that point where I can make something that is unequivocally good.
Yeah.
And then the game becomes, can I repeat it? Can I make the next book good? Can I get a string of good books? Then maybe I've got 5 or 6 books. I'm like, the 6th one, a little shaky. I'm like, damn it, I broke my streak. Let's see if I can get 8 good books in a row. And then just at a certain point, you enter this unified field. And you're just in this creative flow, and you put things out to the universe, and things come back to the universe, and you connect with people, and you connect with readers and other creators, and the world just becomes this beautiful place of just creative energy swirling around you in this beautiful Charybdis.
Nice. We got the whole utopia working there. That's awesome. Well, I think we've gone around these topics a lot. There's a lot we've said and gotten into and dug into, and it's been great. Do you have an idea of what your next thing is, or have you not even? You're like, I can't think about that yet. I got to get this done. Like,
I have 3 books on deck.
Wow.
First book is a sequel to the psychological thriller that I published called Eye of the Gods. That was my first book. In that book, it's a psychological thriller about a man. He's cursed with visions he can't control. He can look through other people's eyes and he can see what they see. He witnesses a murder, only to find it's being reported in the news as a death by natural causes. So that was the first book. That's done, and I wrote it and drew it as a self-contained graphic novel. But enough people have asked me, "Are you going to do a follow-up or a sequel?" That I do have a story, and depending on how the sequel goes, maybe I'll just wrap it up in a trilogy. It could go on longer if there's an audience for it. Then I have another book that I keep telling myself is going to be 4 issues, but knowing myself, it wants to be the length of Morningstar. And that's the thing. It wants to grow. It wants to be a bigger story. And that's a retelling of an old myth. So I don't want to say more about that one, even though I know a lot of the details, but I want to keep that one on the back burner because the Eye of the Gods sequel is probably what's going to come first. And then after that, I have a political thriller that kind of treads along some of the grounds of V for Vendetta, and dealing with an authoritarian society, and honestly, it's kind of a dark, serious, heavy story, but I think a lot of it is inspired by a lot of what's going on in society right now. Like, I've had the story beforehand in my mind, but it feels like it's a story for now, for this moment we're living in. And it's kind of frustrating that I may not get to it for a few years, because I think the message in it's a dark story that has a positive message in the end, which is, I think, kind of the way I write. I've tried to write happy stories before, and they're all miserable. Even when I've tried to write children's stories, I don't know. I think it's because that's how I exercise my demons. I keep my happy disposition by putting all the negativity or any negative thoughts or feelings I have into artwork. So my people that look at my work first and then meet me think I'm kind of boring. And then people who meet me and then see my artwork think I'm a serial killer. So they're like, what is nightmarish stuff you make? So it's
Well,
just
it's probably good contrast though. If it ends up kind of going into a good place, but it first goes deep into the valley, that's probably a good thing, And you need those stakes in a story to make it, have some weight. So I'm sure it's a good thing, probably. So that's awesome. That's really cool. We get to see a little preview of what you want to get into. So other than that, man, thanks once again. Thank you for coming on, because I think this was a great discussion, and one that I think is hopefully encouraging to a lot of people who are watching on right now. Thank you for everybody in the chat, and also people who will watch later. Once again, tell everybody where they can find you, Jeremy.
Well, first off, thank you again for having me. It's long overdue. Like you said, we've traveled in the same creative circles for years now. And like when I followed you on Twitter, I told you, it's like I was shocked that I wasn't already following you. Like literally, I'm like, why am I not following Marshall? Like when I saw that the thing there where it says the follow instead of following, I was like, I was confused. So thank you so much for having me on. This has been a great conversation and really fun. You asked a lot of thought-provoking questions. So yeah, my website, it's gerimi.net. And from there, there's links to my YouTube channel, all my social media. The best thing I recommend is actually just going to my newsletter on there and subscribing to my newsletter, because I put it out once a month. Sometimes I'll have a few little twice a month there's little notifications or things I want to mention to my audience, but I collect a lot of the social media posts that I share online in one spot. So people who don't necessarily have time to catch everything I do, they get to see, oh, well, here's a live stream he put out this past month. And here's some animated GIFs showing some time lapse of a comic page he's working on. And here's some books that he's reading. Just a little bit of just what's going on in my world. So, oh, I see some comments in the chat that Imperium Vol bought 5, 6, and 7 of Morningstar. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll get those out to you.
Yeah, and again, yeah, follow the links. There are actually some of those links are already in the description, so you guys can click on that. And yeah, totally, man. The pleasure is mine. And yeah, the Twitter thing, I don't use. I only am starting to use Twitter because I got banned from Facebook and Instagram. So it's like my last hope of having social media. So that's probably why I'm starting to pop up in the people's feeds a little. But anyways, yeah, man, once again, great pleasure having you. And anytime you want to come back, promote something, or we'll talk again about whatever, I'm happy to have you, man.
Well, I look forward to having you on my channel. So we'll figure out a good time, and we'll have part 2 where I can dig into your brain.
Awesome. Hopefully there's something there. All right, man. Thanks again, and we will talk to everyone another time. Later.